time folds back on itself. Again, his senses scream as the very impossibility of what is happening assaults them. But the champion of light endures.
Expectations can really impact an experience. I thought the special episodes that followed Alan Wake were disappointing. I didn't expect them to be substantially different, but I did hope they'd fill in some details just hinted at in the original ending, and they simply didn't, despite being free for those who owned the game. After that experience, I didn't come into American Nightmare expecting a whole lot given its apparent focus on arcade mode, and having read and heard a few things indicating not to expect much from it. Accurate or not, this worked to my and the game's advantage in this case because I came away pleasantly surprised by my brief time with the game. It felt fresh, and while there isn't a lot to it, it fills in a few details about the main characters and what happens following Alan's disappearance. It remains to be seen what exactly is real from this bridge in the narrative, but overall I found it a welcome interlude between Alan Wake and what comes next, given its modest runtime. I didn't really want more, so it ended up feeling just about right.
Each time he gets a little closer, each time another detail falls into place. Now the trap works against the Herald of Darkness.
I think the primary things contributing to that freshness over the brief journey were the visuals, and especially combat. I did switch to a 1440p monitor recently, so that's a factor, but not the only one. I appreciated the different Arizona desert environment, and less claustrophobic spaces compared to the tight forest and darkness of the Pacific Northwest. I liked Alan's flannel shirt. Image clarity and quality were noticeably improved. Nothing immense, but a pleasant surprise. Combat was quite simply empowering in comparison to Alan Wake. The first weapon you pick up is a 9mm with a 10-round magazine and fast reload. You have to boost the flashlight for it to have any effect on enemies now, but the battery recharges substantially faster, even if the charge has been fully depleted. I experimented in the first encounter and found that I could reliably dodge endlessly. Sprint duration also seemed unrestricted at first, but you can still run out of breath. It just takes a while, and you recover quickly. It all felt like a power trip, comparatively, and that was even before I started picking up weapons like the nail gun, submachine gun, assault rifle, etc. Flares and flashbangs return to burn the darkness away from enemies, though flashbangs only seem to stun enemies now, as opposed to killing them outright. It was a streamlined and more enjoyable experience for me to get at what I wanted, which was to progress through the game and discover any narrative details there were. I considered Alan Wake essentially an action game, with awkward-feeling elements of survival horror that mostly added frustration to my experience. American Nightmare doubles down on the action, which seemed a good fit to me, given the existing foundation. Despite the much shorter runtime on offer here, there's more enemy variety, adding to my impression that criticism of the first game was taken into account here. There are enemies that replicate when shot, others that evade and reposition by turning into a swarm of bats. There are big chainsaw enemies, spiders, and these jerks that hide and throw grenades at you from afar. None of the enemies need to be fought that differently, but I still appreciate the differences. Enemies also generally appear in front of you, as opposed to right behind in mid-swing, another paid point that I found in Alan Wake. It still happens, but even if it does, being able to reliably dodge those enemies alleviated frustration. Overall, I was set free of nearly all my irritations from Alan Wake, and having played that recently, it all felt pretty liberating. I played on normal. There is also a nightmare difficulty that I think would be a lot more manageable in this game than the last one, but I didn't feel the need to try it out. American Nightmare's single-player story takes place across 3 fairly small levels: a motel, an observatory, and a drive-in movie theater. You can see the observatory high up on a mountain from both the motel and drive-in areas, and you can see the others from the observatory vantage as well. It adds a nice little feeling of connectedness and place, even though the areas are discrete. Alan visits each of these locales 3 times. Each visit is brief, but there is repetition. The objective each time in each place is the same. You're essentially stuck in a time loop. but characters that assist you remember details between each visit, and they set up shortcuts for you so the later visits are especially quick. If you want to find all the manuscript pages and the live action and radio episodes, you'll still have to explore though, and these are different on each visit. While the empowering combat was fleetingly therapeutic after the first game, I was mainly here for any story details I might be able to extract from whatever this was going to turn out to be. I ended up pretty satisfied from this angle, especially considering the game's brief runtime. There certainly isn't a lot, and given the existence of Alan Wake 2, I don't think the ending can have really happened the way it's presented. But what you do get is some characterization of Mr. Scratch, who is only name-dropped at the end of Alan Wake, and some details on what's happened with the main characters in the 2 years since Alan has been missing. This felt like a nice little preamble going into Alan Wake 2. Alan's badass combat improvements are explained by his growing familiarity with the Dark Place, the mechanics of his new reality, and ability as a writer to control things. While the story takes place in the fictional Night Springs, it also takes place in the real world, some town transformed by the dark powers that be. Mr. Scratch is the immediate antagonist, but perhaps the biggest takeaway is that there are many powers that be in the Dark Place, and many are bigger than Mr. Scratch, as he reveals when threatening Alan. This harkens back to Alan's revelation at the end of the first game, that the Dark Place isn't a lake, it's an ocean, and opens the door for essentially endless possibilities in Alan Wake 2. I found all the manuscripts, radio, and TV programs while playing, and I think these are essential to get the most out of things, especially the latter two. The manuscripts are pretty easy to find as they show up now on your minimap. Some are more interesting than others, but they mostly serve to refresh your memory on events in the first game and fill in some additional detail to the characters you meet in this game. The radio programs follow Barry, the old gods of Asgard, and your wife Alice in the present day, and what they've been up to over the last 2 years. The live-action TV segments are your primary way to observe Mr. Scratch, and they are surprisingly dark, violent, and sardonic. While there's still goofiness here like in Alan Wake, I found these somewhat disturbing. For the short 4 hours it took me to play through the game, even taking my time, I found the payoff worth it. I think American Nightmare, Reality or Not, provides a nice little epilogue to the first game, and hopefully, we'll see, a bridge between it and the full sequel. I'll touch on arcade mode here quickly. I didn't spend a great deal of time with it. The purpose isn't really there for me. I wasn't sure I should even mention it at all, but I did try it. I wondered if it might be comparable to something like the Mercenaries modes from Resident Evil 4 and 5 that I enjoyed a ton with a friend. I guess it sort of is, but it's smaller and simpler. There is a scoring system that essentially begins and ends with killing things while not taking damage. You get rushed by enemies for 10 minutes until the sun rises and ends the challenge. I can't really imagine anyone returning to American Nightmare at this point doing so for this mode, but it's an attempt to further leverage the content on offer here and the combat improvements. Overall, American Nightmare was a fun little diversion, and I'm glad it was bite-sized. I'm feeling primed and ready to jump into Control next, which I'm excited to do. And in fact, have already, given the time it's taken me to get this video together. Expect more on that soon, but for now, thank you so much for checking out the video, and as always, until next time, take care.